the empire beneath the earth. The war above raged with unstoppable fury. Cities crumbled under Allied bombs, skies turned black with smoke, and yet, beneath that dying world, a second empire was taking shape. We are continue like, subscribe, and write a comment. Hidden deep under forests, mountains, and city ruins, Hitler's engineers were building something extraordinary and terrifying. A network of bunkers, tunnels, and fortresses that would form the underground Reich. A world designed to survive even after the surface was lost. At first, the idea sounded practical: protection from air raids, secure command centers. But soon, the obsession grew darker. Hitler's paranoia had consumed him. He began to believe that salvation lay not in his armies, but in the cold safety of concrete and steel. In 1943, when Allied bombs began pounding Berlin, he ordered the expansion of his underground empire. Every major leader of the Third Reich was to have a fortress, a personal command bunker, protected by walls thicker than anything mankind had ever built. Thousands of prisoners were forced to dig day and night. Many died under collapsing tunnels, buried alive in silence. Their graves became part of the walls that were meant to protect their masters. And at the center of it all stood one man, terrified of the world he once ruled: Adolf Hitler. As Germany began to crumble above ground, he ordered his empire to retreat below it. The dream of victory had turned into a nightmare, sealed in concrete. But what exactly were these bunkers hiding? Were they just shelters, or something far more sinister? The deeper we dig into history, the more chilling the truth becomes. Why the bunkers were built. It began with fear, not of bombs, but of collapse. By late 1942, the Third Reich's once unstoppable march had started to falter. Stalingrad was turning into a graveyard for Hitler's armies. The Eastern Front was bleeding. The Allies were returning in the West. And in Berlin, panic whispered through the marble halls of power. Hitler refused to show weakness. Publicly, he promised victory, but privately, he was building his escape. He summoned Albert Speer, his trusted architect, and gave him an impossible order: build me fortresses that can outlast the war itself. From that moment, Project Reese was born. Reese, meaning giant. A vast network of tunnels and chambers hidden in the Ural Mountains of Poland and beneath Berlin itself. Factories, command centers, armories, all buried deep underground. It was meant to be Hitler's last card, a secret world from which he could command the Reich even if Germany above was destroyed. But this ambition came at a horrific cost. Thousands of forced laborers from concentration camps were sent to carve out the tunnels: men, women, and even children. They dug through stone with their bare hands, starved, beaten, and left to die in the cold darkness. Every meter of concrete was bought with human lives. Still, the Führer demanded more. He wanted underground railways connecting cities, hidden weapons depots, even living quarters for the elite. An entire civilization beneath the earth, while the one above was burning. By 1944, Germany was no longer fighting to win, it was fighting to hide. And inside those shadowed corridors, the seeds of the Reich's final delusion began to grow. Beneath the earth, building Hitler's secret empire. By 1943, the Allied bombers ruled the skies. Factories that once fueled the Nazi war machine were being turned into twisted metal and fire. The solution, Hitler believed, was simple: take the war underground. Deep beneath the forests of Silesia, the Ural Mountains thundered with explosions. Tunnels stretched for miles, reinforced with steel, carved by slave hands, echoing with the screams of the dying. This was Project Reese, one of the most secret and ambitious engineering operations in human history. But the deeper you go, the darker it gets. Prisoners from Auschwitz, Gross-Rosen, and Buchenwald were brought in by the tens of thousands. They worked in shifts that never ended, 20 hours a day, covered in dust, starved on watery soup and bread crusts. The Nazis called it labor. The prisoners called it hell. Inside these tunnels, blueprints were drawn for something extraordinary. Rooms big enough for command centers, aircraft assembly halls, even laboratories rumored to be developing advanced weapons. Documents speak of Wunderwaffe, miracle weapons, said to be tested in these hidden facilities. And at the heart of it all, deep under Berlin, lay the Führerbunker, the nerve center of the crumbling empire. Walls of reinforced concrete, 13 feet thick, buried 30 feet underground. Hitler's private refuge, his final fortress, and soon, his tomb. Above ground, cities were burning. Armies were collapsing. But inside those cold concrete walls, Hitler surrounded himself with illusion. maps showing victories that no longer existed, reports filled with lies, and generals too afraid to tell the truth. Germany was falling apart. But in the silence of the bunkers, the Führer still believed he could rise again. Turning point, the Allies discovered the underground Reich. As 1944 drew to a close, the Allies were finally breaking through the Western Front. France was liberated, and Hitler's armies were retreating across a ruined Europe. But as the Allies advanced, they stumbled upon something that defied belief: entire underground cities hidden beneath the earth. Near Nordhausen, American soldiers uncovered the Mittelwerk, a vast subterranean factory where the V-2 rockets had been built. The air reeked of fuel, oil, and death. Bodies of slave laborers lay piled in corners, their hollow eyes staring into eternity. The soldiers had expected a weapons depot. What they found instead was a mass grave disguised as a military installation. Deeper inside, they discovered half-finished machinery, jet turbines, armored hulls, and strange blueprints labeled Wunderwaffe, the miracle weapons Hitler had promised would turn the tide. Among them were designs for the V3 cannon, meant to obliterate London from 100 miles away, and sketches for flying wings, precursors to modern stealth bombers. Meanwhile, in the east, the Soviets made a chilling discovery. In the Aal Mountains of Poland, near the town of Waldenburg, they found miles of tunnels, some flooded, some sealed, all built by concentration camp laborers. No one knew exactly what had been constructed there. Some claimed it was Hitler's final redoubt, a fortress where he would make his last stand. Others whispered it was a research complex, housing technologies the world had never seen. Both sides realized the same terrifying truth. Hitler's defeat on the surface did not mean the war underground was over. Something deeper, older, and more secret still pulsed beneath the soil of Germany. And the race to uncover it had just begun. The Führerbunker, Hitler's last fortress. Berlin, April 1945. Above ground chaos. Soviet artillery thundered relentlessly, turning the capital of the Third Reich into a sea of smoke and rubble. But below the shattered streets, Adolf Hitler still ruled his crumbling empire from deep within the Führerbunker, his final refuge and tomb. The bunker itself was a maze of reinforced concrete, 18 feet thick walls, dimly lit corridors, and rooms filled with maps, cables, and the faint hum of ventilation. Here, Hitler and his inner circle, Goebbels, Eva Braun, and a handful of generals, clung to the illusion that Germany could still win. Every day, he shuffled between rooms, raving at phantom divisions, ordering counterattacks that no longer existed. The atmosphere was suffocating. The air was stale with smoke and fear. Generals whispered in corners. Secretaries wept silently as the walls shook with each Soviet bombardment. Eva Braun tried to bring fragments of normalcy, offering coffee, laughter, but even she knew it was over. Eyewitnesses later described Hitler as a ghost of himself, trembling hands, gray skin, hollow eyes. He had lost touch with reality. To him, surrender was worse than death. Outside, Soviet troops closed in, street by street. On April 29th, Hitler married Eva Braun in a quiet ceremony, the final act of defiance against the world he had destroyed. The next day, they were both dead. In the silence that followed, his body was carried up the narrow stairwell and burned in the garden above. The once feared Führer, reduced to ash amidst the ruins of his empire. But the bunker didn't die with him. When the Soviets finally entered, what they found inside raised more questions than it answered. The Soviet discovery and the hidden files. May 2, 1945. Berlin lay in ruins. The thunder of artillery had fallen silent, replaced by an eerie calm. Soviet soldiers, caked in dust and exhaustion, pushed through the broken walls of the Reich Chancellery, the final fortress of the Nazi regime. In the courtyard above, smoke still curled from the blackened ground where Hitler and Eva Braun had ended their lives. Below, hidden behind reinforced steel doors and layers of concrete, the Führerbunker waited, dark, silent, and suffocating with the stench of death. When Soviet troops pried the door open, the beam of a flashlight swept across overturned chairs, burned maps, and half-burned papers scattered across the floor. Telephone wires dangled like veins from the ceiling. A typewriter still held a half-finished message. The Führer commands, but the rest was unreadable. Then came the discovery that would shake the post-war world: charred remains wrapped hastily in a blanket, partially buried in the garden outside. Soviet officers suspected what the world would later confirm. They had found Hitler's body. But Stalin didn't want the truth revealed. For years, Soviet intelligence kept the discovery secret, spreading rumors that Hitler had escaped to Spain, Argentina, even Antarctica. It was psychological warfare, meant to keep the West guessing and the myth alive. Inside the bunker, Soviet investigators collected what remained: Hitler's personal documents, Goebbels' last radio orders, and cryptic notes written in pencil by bunker staff. Each page, each burned edge, was a clue to a dying empire. The world above celebrated victory. But in the cold, silent corridors beneath Berlin, the true ending of Nazi Germany was written, in ash and secrecy. Secrets buried in concrete, what the Allies found later. Years after the war ended, the ground beneath Berlin still whispered with secrets. What the Soviets uncovered in 1945 was only part of the truth, because beneath the Führerbunker, there were other tunnels, deeper, older, and more mysterious. In the 1950s, when West Berlin began reconstruction, workers stumbled upon sealed concrete chambers that weren't on any Allied maps. Inside, they found rusted steel doors welded shut from the inside, air vents, wiring, and strange, high-voltage systems that puzzled engineers. Western intelligence immediately took notice. Was this just an air defense shelter? Or something more? Declassified documents decades later revealed that these bunkers were part of a vast network, the Führerbunker complex, a labyrinth stretching under the Reich Chancellery, connected by tunnels large enough for trucks. Some rooms appeared to have been storage for chemical supplies or experimental technology. Others had signs of testing, burn marks, unusual ventilation systems, and heavy blast doors. British and American teams inspected fragments of scientific notes and radio schematics, suggesting that Hitler's engineers were developing secret communication systems, and possibly an early form of electromagnetic shielding. Most chilling of all, investigators found maps leading further east, toward Poland and Czechoslovakia, locations later linked to hidden Nazi research facilities. As Allied officers pieced the evidence together, a haunting realization set in. These bunkers were not just shelters, they were the final laboratories of a dying regime, still experimenting, still planning, even as Berlin burned above them. The Führer's underground world wasn't just where the Third Reich ended. It was where its darkest ambitions retreated into the shadows, and almost vanished from history. The vanishing treasures of the Reich. When Berlin fell, the Soviets weren't just searching for Hitler, they were searching for what he left behind. Gold, art, weapons, archives, the very essence of the Nazi regime's plundered empire. Deep inside the tunnels connected to the Führerbunker, Red Army soldiers found empty crates, broken safes, and burned papers, evidence that someone had gotten there first. Rumors spread through the Soviet ranks that a special SS convoy had left Berlin in the final days, loaded with mysterious cargo. Its destination, the Alps. For decades, stories surfaced of trains vanishing into the mountains, the infamous Nazi gold train. Some believed it carried stolen art from across Europe. Others said it held documents and prototypes, plans for weapons and technology the Allies never saw. But some clues pointed back to Berlin itself. Witnesses spoke of midnight operations in the last week of April 1945, trucks entering the Chancellery courtyard, then disappearing into underground ramps near the Tiergarten. The cargo? Sealed chests marked with the Reich's eagle insignia. When the Soviets returned to search, those tunnels had been destroyed, collapsed by explosives or buried under tons of rubble. Only fragments remained, scorched steel boxes, and whispers of a secret the Reich never wanted revealed. Years later, documents from Soviet archives confirmed that dozens of missing artworks and classified weapons files were indeed traced to Berlin's underground vaults, and never recovered. To this day, historians believe that millions in treasure and technology still lie buried beneath the ruins of the city, hidden in bunkers built to survive the apocalypse. In the ashes of defeat, Hitler's underground world didn't die. It simply went deeper underground. The myths, legends, and haunting echoes beneath Berlin. Even after the guns fell silent, Berlin's underground never truly slept. Beneath the rebuilt streets and modern towers, echoes of the past still whisper through forgotten tunnels, the last ghosts of a regime built on secrecy and fear. In the years after the war, workers excavating subway extensions would sometimes stumble upon reinforced walls, sealed steel doors, and airless chambers filled with rusting equipment. Some claimed to hear the faint hum of machinery, others swore they smelled diesel and burned oil, as if the war had never ended down there. Urban explorers who dared to venture into restricted zones reported entire underground complexes, intact, frozen in time. Beds neatly arranged. Maps still pinned to the walls. One photograph even showed a conference room beneath a children's hospital, its concrete ceiling reinforced for bombing raids, its purpose never officially explained. Then came the stories. Of shadows moving in sealed corridors, of muffled voices echoing where no one could have survived. Historians dismissed it as imagination, yet they couldn't deny that some bunker entrances shown on 1945 blueprints were missing from modern maps. What frightened many was not just what might still lie buried, but why it was buried. Was it simply the chaos of war, or something more deliberate? A hidden network meant to protect secrets, not people? Even now, more than 70 years later, Germany forbids excavation in certain areas once linked to the Führerbunker. Officially, it's for safety. Unofficially, perhaps for silence. Because some parts of history aren't lost. They're buried on purpose, waiting for the day when someone, somewhere, digs too deep and finds what the Reich wanted the world to forget. The end of the bunkers, and the lessons they left behind. Today, the Führerbunker lies silent, buried beneath an ordinary parking lot in Berlin. No plaques, no monuments, just asphalt and a few cars parked over what was once the beating heart of the Third Reich's final days. A deliberate act of erasure. Germany chose not to glorify, but to forget, to leave the monster entombed beneath the weight of history. But memory cannot be buried so easily. The bunkers, the tunnels, the secrets, they remain as haunting symbols of a nation consumed by its own ambition. They remind us that Hitler's underground empire wasn't just a network of concrete walls, it was a reflection of his paranoia, his detachment from reality, and the isolation that devoured him as his empire collapsed above. From those dark chambers, orders were sent that doomed millions. And when defeat came, those same walls witnessed the death of an ideology that had promised power but delivered only ashes. Today, historians and visitors walk carefully over that ground, their footsteps tracing the edges of one of history's deepest shadows. There are no flags, no flowers, no triumph, only quiet. And perhaps that's fitting. Because the story of Hitler's secret bunkers isn't about mystery or lost treasure. It's about the cost of blind obedience, the danger of fanatic belief, and the human will to survive even when the world collapses. As one survivor of Berlin's final days once said, "In the end, we were all trapped, not in bunkers, but in lies." And so, as the dust of time settles over those buried halls, one truth remains unshakable. Evil may hide underground, but history always brings it to light. Thank you for watching. Remember, the past isn't just behind us. It's beneath us.